Hi everybody, I'm thrilled to be here and talking about one of my favorite stories in the Bible. It's in the Gospel of Luke. It's actually in all three Gospels, but it's the story of the demoniac. When Jesus travels with his disciples by boat through a storm over to an island that's inhabited by Gentiles, and finds a man who is severely demon-possessed. He has a legion, he says, of demons residing within him. And Jesus casts them out of the demoniac. So if you want, let's go to Luke 8, and this starts in Luke in verse 22. And I'm just going to read it real quick because I want to come back to some elements of it. One day, he and his disciples, that's Jesus, got into a boat and he told them, let's cross over to the other side of the lake. So they set out, and as they were sailing, he fell asleep. Then a fierce windstorm came down on the lake. They were being swamped and were in danger. They came and woke him up, saying, Master, Master, we're going to die. Then he got up and rebuked the wind and the raging waves. So they ceased, and there was a calm. He said to them, where is your faith? They were fearful and amazed and asked one another, how can this be? Who is this? He commands even the winds and the waves, and they obey him. They sailed to the region of the Gerasenes, which is opposite Galilee. When he got out on the land, a demon-possessed man from the town met him. For a long time he had worn no clothes and did not stay in a house, but in the tombs. When he saw Jesus, he cried out, fell down before him, and said in a loud voice, what do you have to do with me, Jesus, you Son of the Most High God? I beg you, don't torment me. For he had commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man. Many times it had seized him. And though he was guarded and he was bound by chains and shackled, he would snap the restraints and be driven by the demon into deserted places. What is your name? Jesus asked. Legion, he said, because demons had entered him, and they are many, he said. And they begged him not to banish him to the abyss. I'm just going to stop right there. Just to remind you, in Ephesians 6:12, Paul reminds us that we are not wrestling. We're wrestling with powers and principalities. We're not wrestling with flesh and blood. We're wrestling with powers and principalities. And Paul is reminding us there forcefully that we are in a spiritual battle all the time. As believers, we are in a spiritual battle, and we live in a spiritual realm. We inhabit a spiritual realm. So this is such an amazing story because it is a demonstration of the power and the authority of Jesus over the powers of the earth, over demonic powers, over these principalities. Interestingly enough, later in Luke, in 9:1, this is a power that he is going to confer on his disciples. So as we read this, please keep in mind that Jesus gave the power that he demonstrates here over these principalities, over these forces of the earth to believers. Okay? He gave us the power and the authority to cast out demons and to heal the sick and raise the dead. That's some power, all right? But we're a lot like, unfortunately, I think, the disciples in the beginning of this. Now, let me just, as an aside here, say, many people just skim right over this story. I think because they go, oh yeah, great, Jesus came in contact with this poor demon-possessed guy and he cast the demons out of him, and they don't, because they're like, I'm not demon-possessed, right? I don't have demons living with me. I've just got, some problems in my life that are holding me back. I think the mistake we make here is thinking that we need to be demon-possessed to fully get something out of this teaching. It's not true. There is a lot here about seeing powers that bind people, powers that oppress people, powers of the earth, and it really opens up Ephesians 6:12 for me. No, I'm not demon-possessed. No, I didn't arrive at the mission demon-possessed, but I was oppressed. And I lived a life that was oppressed by spirits The spirits of the earth. The spirits of the earth. The powers of the earth. What were they? They were the power of addiction. They were the power of greed. They were the power of success. They were all the things that the world throws up to us as substitute powers for the power of Jesus and the power of God. We have to come to believe that as believers, just like the disciples did. Notice how this starts. Jesus has been teaching like crazy before this trip across the water. He has been surrounded by crowds because Jesus was surrounded by crowds just about everywhere he went. He has performed healings. He has taught and taught. And then the Bible says he spoke to his disciples one day and he said, let us cross over to the other side. Let's get in the boat. Let's cross over to the other side. So they got in the boat and they were crossing over to the other side. A storm comes up. A fierce storm. Jesus is asleep. His disciples are terrified. Notice that Jesus gets up and they wake him up because they're terrified. Jesus rebukes the storm. He rebukes it. What do you rebuke? What do believers rebuke? What does Jesus rebuke? He rebukes demonic powers. He rebukes the waves here because somehow the powers of the earth have sent a storm out to block Jesus from getting to this man. Jesus is not just going for a joyride on this boat. He has a purpose. He is seeking out the one, which is a wonderful thing that Jesus does over and over. He tells a parable about it. He is seeking out the one. He is seeking out the one. He has heard the cry of this possessed man's heart. He has heard it. Just like he sought out the woman at the well. Jesus comes after the one. He comes after those who have a heart willing to know him. And he knows that, right? So he is set out in search of this man. He is set out to find this man. And spirits are already coming against him. He wakes up, he rebukes it. And he says to the disciples who are scared to death of the storm, thinking they're going to die, where's your faith? And then they are in fear of him. They are amazed. They have a holy awe that comes over them at the power of God. And they say, who is this man? Who is this man that can do this? Jesus has the authority and the power to rebuke anything. One of the true and powerful attributes of Jesus is that he is never ever bound by the circumstances that we are bound by. And in fact, he has come to show us how to get unbound from those circumstances, how not to be subject to the forces of this earth, which manifests every day in circumstances. He's not bound by that. And he has given us the authority and the power not to be bound by that either, to rebuke the things that come against us and to walk in freedom. So let's go on to the island and let's see what happens. Jesus casts these demons out. There are many of them. There's a whole other teaching. There's so many teachings that you can do out of this. One is there's a local history here. A battle against the Romans has been fought here. So it's interesting that the demon says his name is Legion. Okay, that's a term for a Roman military term for 1,000. So there are lots and lots of demons that are meeting Jesus and that Jesus casts out of him. But I want to pause and look for a minute at what these demons have done to him. Because it's here, I think, for me anyway, that I found and identified with what it is that this man is suffering from. We are told that these demons that possess him are so powerful that no one in the village can control him. No one. In fact, they have chained him up to try to control him because he's running amok, as they say. He's running amok. He's running wild. They can't control him. They put chains around him and attempt to tame him and tame these powers that way. But he bursts through the chains. He wanders in graveyards. He wanders among the dead. He wanders among the tombs. And he cries out, and he cries out, and he cries out. I imagine if you were living in the village, this was quite something to behold. A man who's so ragingly possessed by demons that you can't control him even by a chain, and who wanders among the dead all day. That strikes home for me. That strikes home for me. And this is the analogy I want to make to the powers of this earth that bind us, that we actually allow to bind us. When I got to the mission, I was bound and chained by my addiction. Bound and chained by my addiction. Just like the men had done to the demoniacs, I had attempted to control it. I had attempted to surround it with something to keep it at check. I've been to a lot of different rehabs. I'm not knocking rehabs, and I'm not knocking a 12-step program. I can just tell you they didn't work for me. They do work for people. But any attempt that I had made to control my demons at the time, the powers of oppression that surrounded me, the spirits that surrounded me, I'd broken through those chains. You couldn't control my addiction. I couldn't outthink it. I couldn't outdiscipline it. I couldn't apply any sort of behavior modification on myself to keep it in check. I just couldn't do it. And I tried. I have a lot of self-discipline. I've been through school. I've achieved things. I've been in positions of leadership where I've had people under me. There was no way to outthink, there was no way to bind, there was no way to control, just like there was no way to control the powers that had a hold of the demoniac. I burst through my chains every time, just like he did. And just like him, many of us actually wander around in dead places. And what I mean by that is, I wandered around, I surrounded myself with addicts. People that were also living lives of death. I wandered around tombs. Jesus says, that we are spiritually dead if that happens to us. Paul also talks about that. I was spiritually dead, and I lived and wandered around and hung out in places that were spiritually dead, with people that were spiritually dead. So I surrounded myself with the dead. Just like he did, I felt like I was wandering around empty tombs. I was lost. I was lost, and I cried out because I was miserable. I was miserable. The power, I guess it's the pathos, really, the sadness of the demoniac here touches my heart, and it touches many people's heart. If you think of him not as just this sort of oddity, the man who's so demon-possessed, although that's significant too. I don't mean to downplay that. Many people are. But if you also relate to it as being bound by powers and principalities of this earth, because I believe that we're all like the demoniac. I believe that we're all bound before we find Jesus by the powers and principalities of this earth, and we have no authority over them. We chase the wrong things. We chase false gods. We chase emptiness in our life. We chase relationships. We chase money. We chase success. We do these things over and over again. And we're basically wandering and surrounding ourselves with the dead. It's haunting when you think of your life like that. But as a believer now, I can look back on it and say that clearly describes my life. Paul made it very clear, we are in a battle. We are in a spiritual battle, and it's not against the people. It's against power and principalities. Jesus has rebuked these powers already, and he delivers from these powers because he has the authority, and he demonstrates the authority here to subdue and free this man. He frees this man. The people can't believe it. The people that come back that have tried to chain him, they are actually afraid of it. They cannot understand the power of this man. They cannot understand it, and they don't want to understand it. Which is really crucial here. There are many people that come in contact with the power of Jesus. Many people who have seen and heard and had things demonstrated for them, even in contemporary life, about the power and the authority of Jesus through the Holy Spirit. I've seen healings. I've seen deliverance. I've witnessed my own deliverance, and I've witnessed many other. I have people that just don't believe it. There are people that just don't believe it. YouTube's full of videos of why healings are fake, why this, why that. There are plenty of people who are afraid of it, who literally hold back from it. So it doesn't surprise me that the people on this island have done so. They want Jesus to get out of there. They want Jesus to get out of there. There are a lot of people now, unfortunately, that want Jesus to get out of there. There are a lot of people that have closed their mind to the power of Jesus. But I'm here to tell you, the power of Jesus doesn't depend on those circumstances. The power of Jesus depends on His love and His care. He comes after the one. When I got here, when I got to this mission, I really didn't want anything to do with God. I didn't come from a background of belief. I just came here because I had to come here. And I actually told people, if they start talking about that God stuff and speaking over me about Jesus and speaking in tongues, I'm out of there. I didn't want anything to do with it. I recoiled from it. But I didn't have anywhere else to go, so I guess I was stuck. And I was. But what I didn't know, and what the demoniac found out, is that Jesus comes after the one. And we're all the one. Jesus comes after the one. And He pours His love out on you. And He pours His deliverance out on you. And He makes a way when there's not any way. There seemed to be no way for this man. But the power and the authority of Jesus broke through chains, broke through, dispelled the power of darkness, just as Jesus dispelled that storm. This is what His disciples were witnessing. This is what His disciples were coming to believe. It is, I think, one of the most beautiful tales, the most beautiful stories, the most beautiful examples in the Bible of the extreme freedom that Jesus can affect in our lives. Because what happens after this man is he wants to follow Jesus. And what Jesus does is say, no, what I want you to do is what He tells us all to do in the Great Commission. Go and tell everybody what you were like and what happened to you and who did it. Who did it. That's just so beautiful to me. I mean, I thank God every day that I've gotten to a place where I can tell people, just like this, and in the house with the residents that I work with, I was bound by chains of addiction. I was bound by chains of homosexuality. I was bound by chains of greed and selfishness. I was bound. Jesus sets all that all right. He burst every chain I had, and He delivered me from them. So I'm no longer like that. I am a person that I never, just like the demoniac, I'm amazed. I'm amazed at the person that Jesus has made me. I never thought it was possible. The people around him, around the demoniac, sure didn't think it was possible. They tried everything. They tried everything they could think of. That's what we do. We try everything that we can think of. And we become convinced that there's nothing anyone can do about it. But we haven't met Jesus yet. Jesus is the one that can always do something about it. Jesus is the one that can not only free me, but as a believer, just like in Luke 9:1, He can give me the power and the authority over these things, so that we can go out in the world as believers and demonstrate the same power that Jesus had. Because that's what He gives us. He gives us freedom. And then He says, hey, go do something with your freedom. Go do something with your freedom. He comes all the way across the ocean to save the one, to save the demoniac, to reach out to him because his heart was willing, and Jesus knew that. He frees him from his bondage, and he says, hey, go forth and do likewise. Go forth. Go forth. Go forth. And he does. And he does. It's a beautiful message. It's a powerful message. It's a message that should resonate, I think, with every one of us, because we all are not that different from him. But as believers, we become like the demoniac at the end of that story. We've come to believe. We've come to believe, and we've come to go tell people about it. And like the disciples, and this is going to happen a little bit later in Luke, obviously, but in the next chapter, Jesus is going to say, you've come to believe, now go put it in action. Go put it into action. Go find people who are bound and free them in my name. So I hope this has made that section, that story, that wonderful story, I love Luke, more alive. And I thank you for listening. Thanks.
So my name is Travis MacArthur, and the reason why I came to the mission was because I spent my whole life just not being able to basically exist. Like that's all I did. I didn't live. I spent my life trying to figure out who I was in all the wrong ways. I spent 20 years in the bottle, tried every possible means necessary to stop drinking, and I just could not. I did everything to avoid God, and I finally found myself in a place where I was defeated, in a hotel room with no hope, none at all, until the day I called my grandma, and she told me about this place. And man, I thank God every day for that woman that brought me here. He used her to bring me to this place to save my life, and I got to meet Jesus. So something specific that really, happened here for me at the mission that has drastically changed me is the amount of freedom that came from learning simple obedience. There was a time when I was a resident, and I've told this story many times to the people here that have come through the program, but I was asked to do something that made absolutely no sense. I was asked to go put a stake in the ground and tie up this tree to it, and the tree was completely dead. And this was in hopes that it would grow. And the version of me that had come up through this program that arrived here would have been up in arms about it, because it would have been like, this is stupid, this is pointless, this is a waste of time, and none of those things happened, right? Because the discipline that comes from the mission, that you learn what it really means to just be obedient. I just, without even question or argument in my head or out loud, I just went and did it, regardless of what I thought about it, and I didn't even fight it. And afterwards, I remember reflecting back on that, like literally maybe an hour later, going, wow, like there was so much freedom in just that simple obedience. And that was the first time that I really understood what it meant. Being obedient is probably the most important thing that we can find all throughout Scripture. And in every aspect of our life, there are many things that we have zero control over. Whether it's here at the mission or even outside of the mission. My whole life I spent trying to control things that were absolutely out of my control. And having an understanding of obedience and knowing that and accepting that I just don't have that kind of control, I'm able to have a sense of freedom and be able to apply that in other areas of my life. Not saying that I'm going to enjoy it all the time. In fact, a lot of times I don't. Like inside, it still eats me alive. But I work through it instead of making decisions on that anger or frustration or whatever. And I'm able to take that to the Lord and allow Him to direct me into how I'm supposed to be or act or respond or handle any of those situations. Sometimes it happens quickly, and other times not so quickly, but I don't make decisions based on that, and I know that that's something that will play a huge part in life after the mission as well. So if you're considering coming to the mission, the one thing I will tell you is be willing and desperate. If you don't want to live the way that you're living, be willing to try something that you've never tried before, that you thought you would never try before, and watch what God will do with that. Hey, look, if you're desperate and you want to change, we can help you. There's hope here for you. Just come on in.